This is Dr. Corey Glenn, and as promised in a post I made yesterday, I'm going to make a video on doing smile simulations in this free program called GIMP. So you can just download this off the internet. It's totally free, and it's a image editing software similar to Photoshop. Again, it's just a free and open source one. So for dentistry, there's lots of uses, but my primary use for it is smile simulations. And so what I'm going to do is just do a demo on myself. So I'm going to right click this picture of me. This is just a JPEG, and I'm going to open with GIMP. All right, so here we have just the raw image. This is a close-up of the face. The better, higher detail picture you can get from straight on smiling, the better you're going to be able to do simulations. Okay, so let's talk about just a couple of easy options that we could do here. If you just needed to make like a couple of corrections on teeth and really not change a lot, like let's suppose that uh, I had been proposed to do some incisal lengthening in composite. Well, there's a lot of ways I could accomplish that without getting too fancy. One of them would be to use this clone stamp tool. So when I hold down Control, you can see it selects wherever I click on, and now that becomes a paintbrush. Okay, so I could add some incisal length, right? And I'll periodically grab from a different spot just so that I keep a nice blend to all this. And then I'm going to grab this incisal edge and transport that down here. And what I'll show you is just how I'll blend all of those together. All right, so now I could use the smudge tool and I could smudge this out and try to drag this into like a smooth incisal edge. Okay. If, let's say, I thought that corner was too sharp right here, I could just smudge it back using the pink, right? So it's like you're pushing colors around. Okay, so that's one option. Um, Now, that will work on very simple, minor things, but on other cases, you end up needing to do something that's more of a wholesale replacement of the teeth. So, what I'm going to do for that, let's pretend this is just still the original image. I would just right off the bat duplicate this image. Actually, before I do that, I would add an alpha channel. All right. So, let me explain that before actually I do my selection. Okay, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use this lasso free select tool, and I'm going to just click a lasso around everything within my lips. Okay, so you can't change their lips really, so your dentistry can change what's in between the lips. So basically, we'll cut this out and swap in new teeth for that. All right, now you don't have to be to the micron precise as you're making the selection. Double click to end it. Okay, so real quick, before I duplicate this layer, let me show you why it's important to add an alpha selection. All right, so I've selected this. Let's hit delete. Now you see what's behind here is a white background, okay? And without going into detail, think of that as it lacks an alpha channel. Okay, so it's just going to put a white background. So I could save this picture, but it's going to save it as a picture that has a white cutout to it like this. And that's not what I want. Okay, so let's Control Z that. Watch here when I add an alpha channel. So I've right clicked on the layer. All right, now let's delete. Okay, so now you see there is no background. That pixelation look that you're seeing with those little squares means that there's nothing at all behind this. Thus, it's going to be transparent. So if you need an example of that, let me show you this. All right, this was that slide I posted. Do you see how here it looks white because there's a white background, but if I overlay it, I've got whatever's behind that. It's as if your image has a hole in it. All right, that's what adding this alpha channel, and then we're going to save it as a PNG image file as opposed to a JPEG. But again, that's not terribly important. I will just say right now, though, if you wanted to pull an image into PowerPoint like this, because there's not a good way to do this in PowerPoint, then what I could do is after I add this alpha channel, I could go to File, Export As, and we would go down here and say under File Extension, go down to PNG, all right, and then name it whatever you want, and now save that. When you pull it into PowerPoint, it'll be like the image I just showed you, where there is no background to it, all right? So with that demoed, before I do that, what I want to do is I want to keep one original image here. So I'm going to duplicate this layer. All right. So now I've got the layer, which I'm going to delete this from. All right. That's my top layer. And now I've got that layer as the bottom. So I'm going to clear my selection. All this stuff can be found under select. You could say none or shift control A if you like the hotkeys, which I do. And, we could go ahead now and start positioning teeth, but I find it easier to do a couple other things before I start that, just to aid in my positioning of the teeth. So what I'm going to do is grab some lines and pull them in. So I'll just drag and drop this. It's going to turn that into another layer, and then use this move tool. And I'm going to just position this right on my midline, right? So that's going to aid me in positioning teeth. Now beyond that, I'll usually grab a horizontal line, okay? And we can move this up and down. I believe this picture had already been straightened up. So yeah, that looks like that's parallel to the interpupillary. I like to pull that down here to give myself an indication of where I think incisal edge should be added to. Because that way, when I'm pulling in the new library of teeth, I just drop it on that plane. Okay, so there is the line I want the incisors to fall on. Other things you could grab like the smile line, right? So I can pull that in. And now with the smile line, I'm going to position it down here. Okay, but it's obviously scaled incorrectly for my teeth. And so what I'll do is come up here, right click here, and go to scale. All right. So that lets you just grab it by a corner and stretch it, move it where you see fit. And basically what I want to do is, I've already established that I want the incisal edge right here. So if you're grabbing corners or these nodes, you're going to stretch and move this, right? If you grab the very center, you'll be grabbing the whole image, all right? And so with this, I want to pull it out so that it's following, what the natural smile line should be, okay? And, you can make that flatter or steeper depending on how you stretch this. And I basically want it to ride right along where I would like the cusp to end up. All right, these are pretty close over here. Okay, so now that we've done that, we can go ahead and get out of that scaling tool. So I'm going to just click on the move tool. And what I'd like to do right now is I don't want to have to turn all these on and off individually. So all these indicator lines I'd like to keep together. So I'm going to right click the top layer and say merge down, and then repeat that one more time. And now those top three layers you can see have all been combined. And then again, this is nothing you have to do, but if you wanted to, I've also created this golden proportions ruler. Okay, so when we pull this in, once again, let's scale it and move it. All right, I can grab the central point, get it right on the midline, and then I can stretch this until it's on the distal of my canine, right there, and then stretch this one to the distal of my canine. Okay, and that gives you a really good visual indicator of what the ideal golden proportions would be for my particular teeth. All right, so let's click again out of the scale tool, and once again I'm going to merge that down. Now I've got all of these just combined as one layer. Okay, so now we would be ready to go ahead and position teeth. So I'm going to go into this library that I've created, and I like to usually just do maxillary arches because so many times you're not treating the lower and they don't really show anyway. So to me, the images look more natural if you're just pulling in a PNG image of a maxillary arch as opposed to both arches, but you can do whatever. But I do generally try to look at the smile beforehand, and mine's relatively flat. Could be the angle of the camera or whatever, but my teeth are pretty worn. But I probably would not want to choose an arch that's really oriented like a U shape like this, because I'm going to have to stretch that and move it around and all that. I'd probably want to find some middle ground that is relatively flat like this one. And so I'm going to grab this image and drag in. And now we have this behind or in front of all of our other images. So once again, got to scale it to the right size. And so what I'll typically do is just look at this. Let's line up the midline. And I can bring this, partially overlaying that golden proportions ruler. And again, I'm just lining up distal of canine to that, distal of this canine to that. And you can see that really does line up with where my actual canines are if you're looking through the layers. So I like this alignment. Um, it does look like it's rotated slightly. You can see how much higher up off the teeth I am on this side. So let's go into image and well, maybe it's not that. Maybe it's layer. Yes, layer, transform, and then let's go arbitrary rotation because that's going to let me just go a little bit at a time. So do you see that slightly rotating? It's going a tenth of a degree every click. And I just want to get that lined up where it looks symmetrical. Good. And now I'm going to go back to my scale tool. And then I've pulled this down to where I've got my incisal edge on that predetermined line that I said I wanted to follow. Okay. Now, if you're having difficulty seeing this, let's click off that scale tool. You could right click on this. Well, actually, just go up here, click your layer. If you wanted to put this under those lines, go to layer and under stack, you can say lower this layer. So now that is behind this. All right. But that helps us position everything really, really fast. It's intuitive to do. It's very easy. So I really like that little tooth guide thing and all the midline and everything for helping me with that. So really the only thing left to do here is anywhere that it's not conforming ideally, like these back teeth, they do need to come down. Okay, less so on this side. We're pretty close there, but these teeth need to come down some. So how could I accomplish that? A number of ways. You could use the warp transform. You could use the cage transform. Let's use the warp transform here and see if we can pull down basically everything from behind the canine here. So what I'm going to do is get a little bit smaller spot size. All right. And I'm going to just grab the dead middle of the image here and pull down. All right. So I didn't quite pull this back corner as much as I'd like. There. See how simple that was? Like that just couldn't be much easier. This side, maybe I'll pull the distal inward and contract that a little bit. All right. And then let's just see how it looks. Oh, I'm gonna have to push. All right. So right now, if you look at my image layers, I've got all my guidelines on top. Then I've got this smile. So I don't have it behind this one. So I need to once again go to layers and say lower this layer. All right, now when I turn on that one with the cutout, that's really looking like a nice simulation, if you ask me. Okay, I would probably go with this. Um, the only other thing you might consider doing is if you really wanted to geek out on this, you could, change the coloring on it. So, for example, I could maybe change the exposure and make it whiter or darker. Okay. But anyway, you could play with this all day. I think what I'll do now is merge down all of these layers. So your other option is you can just say merge visible. So now that's a single solid image. So you've still got your original, but I don't want to merge on these colors. Now, if I wanted to do any further fine tuning, like let's say right there, once again, I would use that smudge tool. All right, so I'm going to just pull that up, pull some pink up into that just to get rid of it. And then too, if you've got any harsh corners, like you can see where my mouth cutout ended, you could just kind of blend over these a little bit. If anything just looks like it's a little too sharp, then just blend over it. All right, so that would be, in my mind, a really nice simulation. Okay, so at this point, if I wanted to save this simulation, I could right click it and do File, Export As. And again, I like to do everything in PNG, so Corey simulation. So you could either scroll down or you could just say .png and now just save that wherever you're saving all this stuff. Export. And now if I wanted to do like a simulation for a patient, I could just insert a couple of pictures from this device and we could bring in the original and my simulation. Bring them both down in size. And now just get them both layered up side by side. They should be the same size image, so your scaling should already be dead on. And you could just write before, after. Take a snip of this or save it as a picture. And that could be something you email to patients of, hey, here's what I think we could accomplish. Here's what your new teeth would look like. So it's a really useful tool. If you've made it this far in the video, you're really serious about this stuff. So you might want to know, how do I create my own PNG library? Okay, so instead of making a bunch of different videos, let me just demonstrate that. I'm going to just get out of that and let's just find a picture, I think in my downloads, of, let's say, a nice smile. This one. All right, so I'm going to right click this, say open with GIMP. All right, so here's a picture that you got off the internet or wherever. If you want to turn this into a PNG, come up here and use this free select tool. All right. And let's come in here and click our way around. Now, I keep all the gingiva because that way, if your patient's got a really high lip line, it will be, have real gingiva there to show for it. All right. And now I'm going to get a lot more precise and I'm going to click my way around. So with this free select tool, you can either do it click by click or you can click and hold and it's more of a draw tool. But I want to follow these edges really precisely. All right, and your selection won't end until you double click back where you started from. So I'm going to time lapse this so you don't have to listen to me. I'm going to just do this all the way back around. And here we are back at the start, double click, and now that is your selection. Okay. Remember, just like we did previously, I want to add an alpha to selection. Oh, okay. So this is already a PNG file format. Okay, I thought it was a JPEG. So I have the option to remove the alpha channel, but it already has an alpha channel. Just keep in mind, if you're pulling in a JPEG, you're going to need to add an alpha selection before you can delete this, because otherwise you'll still have a white background around it. Okay, so you can see here what I've selected, and I don't want to delete that. I want to delete everything else. All right, so up here under select, let's invert the selection. So now everything but the smile is selected, and what I'm going to do is hit delete. All right, and that looks like a pretty clean image that I could use in a library. All right. Now I like to also go in here and under image, it's going to be crop to content, because if it just sees tons of dead space, you don't want to have an image that you pull into, let's say, PowerPoint as a PNG, but it has this massive border around it. This way, when you pull this in, it's just going to be that size. So with that done, I'm going to now save this. So file, export as, and let's call this GIMP demo. Got to save it as a PNG, remember? All right. And then back in uh, PowerPoint, let's say that image you saved of yourself earlier with the mouth cut out, right? That's a PNG. And I could now bring in any kind of library that I've created. So the one I just now made was right here, GIMP demo. I pull that in, it overlays my base picture. I put the teeth where I want them, and then I would have the exact same size layer superimposed here, but I would bring it to the front. Okay, so you can do certain steps of this in PowerPoint, and it might be easier for you, but certain things you can't do, like create the PNG files to start with. You're going to have to do that in GIMP or Photoshop or something. Let me think if there's any other good little pointers to show you. Oh, I do know. One of the things I will do sometimes, let's go back to this simulation. Okay. I've not only have I created PNGs of, nice smiles or just maxillary arches, I've done that on individual teeth within an arch. Okay. So if you look right here, these are all individual tooth PNGs. So if you're trying to do the absolute best simulation possible, a lot of times this is probably the way to do it. So I'll grab the scale transform tool, because no stock smile is going to perfectly match up with your patient's teeth that you're doing the simulation on. Okay. But if you have individually alterable teeth where you can individually rotate this one and scale it to their individual teeth, well, that's going to be a lot more realistic simulation. Okay. Changing the degree of rotation. So I could put an individual tooth here. I could rotate it now. Okay. Rotated that a little bit to the mesial. Go back to scale transform. And then skinny that up a little bit. Now, you're probably thinking, well, that's a lot of trouble to create individual tooth libraries, and it is. But one of the cool things is you don't have to create an individual tooth library of the entire arch of teeth, right? Think first molar to first molar. I do one side because what do we want in a beautiful smile? We want symmetry. So I just did one side. For example, here, my right, I pull in just that tooth, individually position it, and then I will go to transform and say flip horizontally. And now you see I have this mirror image, which I can pull to, whatever specs I want individually on that too. I could pull it, make it a tiny bit skinnier, perhaps. All right, so there would be my 8 and 9. And if I really liked those, I could say merge down. So there is now an individual layer of just 8, 9. And I could repeat that for this tooth, and this tooth. Usually you can just use a premolar shape for anything back from here. But now we could do that, and when we bring our overlay over the top of it, we'll have a super, super customized look to this simulation. So that's probably plenty enough to bog most of you down for this video. So I'll quit with that. Probably have no business making the video this early in my use of this program, but again, you can figure it out. So I hope you found that useful.